Okay, I hope everybody is back. I'll start the recording in a second. Okay. Professor Ronen Yitzhak is our host for the session. Please, Ronen.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm happy to open the fourth session, which includes 3 lectures. Each lecture will last 25 minutes, and the discussion will take place after all of them. The first speaker is Julia Lieberman. Julia, okay, from Santa Louis University. The lecture will deal with personal letters addressed to the Mahamad and to elders of the London Shaar Shamaim congregation in the 18th century. Please. Julia?
You are
Here's
muted.
my turn.
Okay.
Can you hear me well?
Yes,
I couldn't
yes,
hear
we
well
can.
everybody, so thank you.
Yes, we can hear you well.
So I'm Julia Lieberman. I am from, I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I think I'm so far the only one from the United States, right?
Yeah, you are only American.
Madeleine is too, I don't know. Well, I shouldn't make
Madeleine,
assumptions.
yeah, but she's, I think about her in different term.
Okay, that's fine. Same thing. Okay, I say I live because
You are
I'm
an
not
American,
from St. Louis.
it's fine, really.
I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to Chaim and to all the organizers of this conference. I can only imagine how much work it involves. I'm delighted to be part of this group. My research and publications deal with Sephardic daily life. In the past, I have published on childhood and family life on communities like Amsterdam and Hamburg in the 17th century, the 1600s. More recently, I have been working on the London Portuguese community in the 1700s, and I draw the line at the turn of the 18th century. I'm writing a book that deals with daily and family life, mostly of the poor and the middle class. And basically, I'm studying the changes that took place in family life between the background, the Iberian background that most Portuguese Jews had, you know, in the previous century, to becoming British. While doing research on this project, I began to notice letters written, you know, to the Mahamad or the elders, and I just created a database of these letters. I knew nothing about ego documents or anything like that, right? My sources, let me discuss my sources. First of all, in 1858, I think, James Picciotto, an Italian Jew living in London, wrote a book, I think it's called Sketches of Anglo Jewry or something like that. And everybody cites his book because the letters that he discusses, he basically translated them loosely and would make comments on them. Now I have read his book, but my sources go much deeper. I went to the original documents, and I'm going to show you 2 things that will give you an idea of my sources. Share. Okay, first of all, this document, this one here is not, I'm not going to discuss letters from this document, but it gives you an idea of how the documents look. So minutes of the meetings of the Mahamad, and then it gives the year. Sometimes they give it only on the Hebrew calendar. Sometimes they give the civil calendar as well. So as I read this type of documents, I begin to notice the letters, right? So here behind, I have one of the letters that I will discuss today. And it's, so it's copied as part of the minutes, right? And so basically it says, So on the 8th of Iyar, 5544, we receive a letter from so-and-so, and this is the copy letter. And so they would just copy the entire letter, right? This is here, and then I will show you the end. It's a very lengthy letter. This one is in Portuguese, and then they copied them exactly as the letters probably would appear. I know that because I have some that were not copied, that they have survived as originals. But this is the kind of documents that I am using. And obviously, I do occasionally, I go to Pichotto to see what he said about these letters. But what I want to emphasize is that he would just discuss the letter of complaint that these people would write. But there's so much more that I call them now cases, because it will be somebody writing very angry at the Mahamad or the elders, rejecting their membership. And if you only read the letter, you don't really know what goes behind them. So by me going to the to records before and after, I realized that usually the case have been, they have been arguing about the whatever it was, the complaint for years, some of them for 15 years. You know, I have traced letters and so on. The letters I'm working with, I am trying to categorize them. One of the categories are the ones I will discuss today, but this is not the only category. I'm now compiling letters by women, which have a very, very different style. Usually they don't complain about anything, but they are thankful for something. But I'm still working with that part of the project. So that I will begin my presentation today. So the London Spanish-Portuguese Jewish community, the Shaar Shamaim congregation in the 1700s, left for posterity a rich collection of records, among them the minutes of meetings of the lay leaders of the congregation, the Mahamad and the elders. The custom of Yehidim, or paid members of the congregation, communicating with these leaders by writing letters to them became rather common starting in the 1750s. And by the turn of the 1800s, congregants wrote letters so often that at every meeting, the topics for discussions consisted frequently of reading and responding the letters from the congregants. The letters were copied entirely on the minute books, some in Portuguese and some in English. And there is a little bit of a difference when they write in Portuguese and they write in English. If they wanted to complain, I think to be more legal, some of them would write in English. But then when they were beginning to beg for a return to the congregation, they would write in Portuguese. But I still don't know that you know, that's kind of a guess. I'm not sure that that's the only reason. Each of these letters represents a unique opinion, but several common categories stand out. As a congregation with numerous poor among them, these letters often mention matters related to the poor and their financial concerns. Some older congregants wrote to offer their savings as legacies to the congregation in exchange for receiving interest as income during their remaining years alive. And in the letters, they would express financial concerns for old age or for the cost of caring for family members. Other times, the letters were from the poor receiving tzedakah, who no longer needed help and wrote to inform the leaders that they did not need to be on the tzedakah roll any longer and to express their appreciation for the help they have received. Letters of appreciation were often written by women. Another topic of these letters was complaints by well-off members of the congregation who were disagreeing with decisions made by the Mahamad or the elders. Even in these letters, financial matters do surface. In this presentation, I will study several representative letters that the authors wrote to the elders of the Mahamad to complain about congregational matters and to announce their decision to cut their ties to the congregation altogether. The letters in most cases are the only evidence that we have from those who converted to Christianity and what they wanted to reveal about why they were rejecting their congregation and even Judaism. To give some context to these letters, I have searched in other congregational records about the author's background and have tried to reconstruct the roots of their complaints and how the leaders of the congregation responded to them in the short and in the long terms. Although women also converted to Christianity and occasionally the leaders removed them from the list of congregational records, the letters under discussions are only from males. As heads of their household, males were responsible for paying their finta or tax and serving on committees, and they could not easily leave the congregation without incurring fines, which when not paid on time would quickly go up. I apologize, there is the first letter I will discuss is from Samson Gideon, who was born in 1699 and died in 1762 in London. On Heshvan 35514, which was September 5, 1753, Benjamin Bonnet, a public notary representing Samson Gideon, delivered a letter to the Mahamad chamber. The English letter is one of the few that has survived in its original form, not copied as part of the minutes like most others. On the records, it is referred as in Portuguese, papel, a piece of paper, and was addressed to the Mahamad and the elders to inform them that he wished no longer to be a member of their, and his words were, a society or congregation. Those were his words. The receipt of this, the letter stated, will not be more displeasing to you than the writing is to me. All the satisfaction I have is that you yourselves have given the occasion and made it necessary. End of the quotation. Gideon was protesting against their unauthorized action on his behalf and refusing to admit their right to represent Jews in general in civil and secular affairs. This letter, which has been discussed by other historians, is the first one of what later became rather common, the announcement of a Yahid or member of the congregation who had decided to no longer be a member and stop paying his finta or tax. As congregational members were not allowed freely to resign their membership, and even those moving overseas needed permission to quit, a vote was taken and 20 of the attendants voted to approve and 6 against Gideon's resignation. The records offer no comment on this case. Gideon was a stock jobber and at the time of his resignation was among the wealthiest members of the congregation. In 1752, his finta or tax was among the 3 highest, over 18 sterling pounds annually, which was, you know, very high tax. Only two other members paid the same. But other than payment of his finta, Gideon's presence was not going to be missed much. He was rarely involved in committees or other services to the congregation. Additionally, he was already married to a Christian woman with whom he had a son who had been baptized, and therefore his departure was in all likelihood surprising. The next time that Gideon's name shows up again on the records is about 9 years later, Heshvan 4:55-23, which is 1762, when the elders were informed that Gideon had passed away and his executors wrote to request that he be buried in the Jewish cemetery. The request was accompanied by Gideon's offering 1,000 pounds and the notes, and I quote from his note, in case I shall be buried at the Jews' burial place at Mile End, in the Carrera or Road, with the rice of a kebir and a simple hashkabah every year. End of quote. The elders immediately approved the executor's request. However, 2 weeks later, the elders were discussing the case again. Their dilemma, it seems, was to decide whether Gideon could be considered a Yahid and whether his having married a Christian woman limited his rights as a Yahid. The records only mention that the elders discussed Escama 23, which said, on my translation, all Yehidim had the rights to be buried in the Jewish cemetery. A clarification was made that Gideon, since his resignation, had been making an annual anonymous donation under the guise of pelonial money on the amount of his finta, and therefore it was concluded that he was considered a Yahid, so he had the right to be buried there. Nevertheless, another Escama, number 26, dealt with those who married a Christian. This Escama did not deny burial in the Jewish cemetery. However, it specified that they could not be buried in a carrera or row, and their body would not be accompanied to the cemetery by the Hassam of the Hebra. These later objections were ignored totally. In conclusion, Gideon's case is the first of those who later more and more frequently rejected their membership to the congregation, but they... I don't know what I hear.
It's mute all, I think.
That's funny, I didn't do anything. I'm sorry. So I don't know where I lost you, but I'll read the conclusion. In conclusion, Gideon's case is the first one of those who later more and more frequently rejected their membership into the congregation, but they never formally converted to Christianity. On approaching death, however, they did not want to be buried among Christians. I will now address Isaac Mendez Furtado's case, which consists of years of disputes between him and members of the Mahamad and culminated with his resignation. On March 24, 1783, Furtado wrote an insulting letter addressed to the Mahamad and the elders, announcing that he and his wife, Sarah Mendez Furtado, were renouncing their affiliation to the congregation. Furtado's most immediate complaint was in reaction to the events that had taken place a few days before on the eve of the festival of Purim. As per his letter, during the reading of the book of Esther, constables had a storm into the synagogue, disturbing him in what he refers to as his devotions and in the distribution of his charities to the poor, end of quote. The next morning, a larger group of constables forcibly removed a group of young men, including his son Abraham, at the knocking of Haman, that's how the records refer to, but Furtado did not attend services. The letter reveals Furtado's pent-up anger and personal animosity towards the Mahamad, and I will quote from his letter. I do therefore abhor and detest your measures and resolutions and despise you as a body. I hold your power in the great contempt. I do renounce your Judaism and the inherent principles and sentiments and inheritance of your land to come, and therefore have sent you the key of my draw, to dismember myself from so irreligious a society. End of quote from his letter. After discussing the letter, the elders' immediate response was to propose and vote for two resolutions. One, that the name of Isaac Mendez Furtado be removed from the list of Yehidim as being unworthy of that honor, and two, that from that day on, he be deprived of all privileges, including burial in the Jewish cemetery on his death. The result of the vote was unanimous, and all attendants voted in favor of the resolution. But Furtado was not done with making his final statement, and soon after his resignation, he erected some tenements for the poor, the Christian poor, that is, that he named Purim Place in commemoration of the dispute. Although Furtado never converted to Christianity, his children were baptized, while his wife, surprisingly, was buried at the Portuguese Jewish cemetery. Furtado died in 1803 at Stoke Newington and was buried in a church. In his will, he reminds his children and friends, and I quote, to wear no mourning whatsoever, a custom I dislike, end of quote. Several historians of London Jewry have previously discussed Furtado's letter, as it was included in Pichotto's book. These historians have focused on the information it offers on the tug of war that the Purim festival caused between the Mahamad, who wanted an orderly behavior in the synagogue, and some congregants who wanted to behave in a rowdy way. But this focus misses other important questions that the letter raises. Among them, the reason behind Furtado's behavior and his contradictory attitude to the custom of giving gifts to the poor on Purim. On the one hand, his refusal to pay the finta, which as per the congregational leaders was money earmarked for the care of the poor. On the other hand, he mentioned in the letter that he was disturbed in the distribution of his charity to the poor. So, you know, was he charitable to the poor or was he not? And finally, as he broke away from the synagogue, he's erecting the tenements for the poor. There is evidence of that Furtado's disagreement with the Mahamad went back at least 10 years before. On February 27, 1774, the Mahamad put together a list of 52 individuals, among them Furtado, who were in arrears paying the finta or tax. The Mahamad sent a warning to pay the finta within a month, or else they would enforce the elders' recently resolution. And I quote, that any person not paying the finta and offerings for a year was committing the sin of retaining the money designated to the poor, and the Mahamad could take his assigned seat in the synagogue, end of quote. Additional, if the bill was not paid within 6 months, the debtor's name would be posted publicly on the synagogue's door. In response to the warning, the records show that Furtado sent what is referred to as a verbal excuse, while others on the list either paid the finta they allegedly owed or arranged to pay it in installments. Whatever excuse Furtado gave, he took a long time to pay the balance, as 3 years later, on November 1777, he wrote another letter to the Mahamad, informing them that he had paid his bill, which by then had amounted to over 22 sterling pounds. Now his finta was about £5, so you can imagine how much the increase, right? The fine that they were charging him. In the letter, he was requesting, and I quote from him, to be placed on the list of the less respectful members of the congregation. And he claims that he could only afford to pay 3 sterling pounds. So the Mahamad was trying to enforce a $5, and he was saying that he couldn't afford more than 3. This also meant that he lost his permanent seat in the synagogue. 5 years later, his finta was reassessed in 1782, and he wrote another complaint protesting the increase of his finta to 10 sterling pounds. The letter again reveals his disagreements with the Mahamad on the distribution of charity. And I quote from his complaint. Men have their singular devotions, some for public, some for private charities. And if I were to pay my mite in the former, the later will go neglected. So he clearly was rejecting paying the synagogue for charity to the poor. He was not really rejecting to be charitable. In conclusion, all evidence seems to indicate that Furtado had for years challenged the Mahamad's authority to impose the finta, but in response, the Mahamad had used their power to humiliate publicly Furtado. In the end, Furtado had tried to show the Mahamad that for him to be charitable, he did not need to be Jewish nor a member of the congregation. So I move on to another case. On April 6, 1785, Joseph Cortizos, a Yahid or member of the congregation, attended a meeting of the Mahamad to report a complaint against another Yahid, Eliyahu Cunha alias Curry. who had been baptized at an unexpected place, the Bullheads pub located at 80 Leadenhall Street. The Mahamad requested that Cortizos would put the accusation in writing, which he did in a lengthy letter in Portuguese. Thus, it started an exchange of letters that involved the accuser, the Mahamad, and elders in Cunha. And this is the letter, I will share it again. This is the letter that I am showing you here from Cortizos. It's a very lengthy letter. He was clearly a poor writer, I might say. He's just accusing Cunha of having been baptized at the pub. Cortizos clarified in his letter that his only motivation was to accuse Cunha based on the insult that his baptism meant not only to Judaism, our religion, he says, but also, and he says, to the established religion of this kingdom, and was not motivated by animosity or any other interest. And it's very interesting because Cortizos was he had been wealthy, and then he was having financial problems. So he probably wanted to clarify that he did not expect any compensation or anything like that. As per Cortizos, after renouncing publicly of his Judaism, Cunha had attended synagogue 3 times, prompting Cortizos to consider the consequences if other Jews would follow the example of what he calls a new sect of baptized Jews. That's how he called, the case of Cunha. And he adds, to enter positions now excluded to Jews. Cortizos was not present at the baptism, suggesting that rumors of the event were circulating in the neighborhood, which motivated Cortizos to go around questioning several people who were present at the ceremony. The first person Cortizos met was Mr. Rankin, a resident of Leadenhall Street, who confirmed that Cunha was not drunk but sober, and that the ceremony was performed solemnly by a minister of the Church of West Ham, and in the presence of 2 godfathers and other people. Cortizos then met the sexton of the church, and finally the minister, Mr. Green. Cortizos described what appears to be a civic conversation between him and Mr. Green. Nevertheless, his description also reveals 2 very different views of Cunha's baptism. Cortizos' main concern was to find out whether the baptism was indeed a proper one. It had taken place at a pub, which is not
Julia,
a
please,
place.
you're going to end?
I'm almost done, right? Okay, so that's fine. So Elias Cunha wrote very offensive letters to the Mahamad and to the elders. He resigned from the congregation, and then years later, he begs the Mahamad and the elders to accept him back as a Jew. His letters were never answered, and then I just want to give the date, on August 5, 1792, a year after Cunha's last failed petition to be readmitted, he had passed away, and at the last minute, the elders in the meeting was called. Close relatives and friends of Cunha had his body at the cemetery, awaiting the elders' decision to allow them to bury him at any spot in the cemetery. After certifying that Cunha had died as a devout and contrite Jew, ready to give account of his actions, he was buried at the Jewish cemetery, but what it was referred to as the Trasas Tabuas, behind the rose. And so those are the cases that I am going to discuss. So let me just give you a very brief conclusion. The letters I have discussed are among 20 or so cases that I have gathered so far. I would like to call them cases because they involve correspondence that preceded and continues beyond the letter of resignation. The major challenge that I have found to my project consists of, which consists of other categories as well, is that the letters are spread out and at times almost buried in interceded records of minutes. So I don't have, the letters all together in one document. They are all spread out all over. But the day-to-day history that these letters tell us is, in my view, worth the trouble. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.